Hello and welcome to the RPG Talk Show. I'm your host, Hawk Robinson, with co-host
John Welker.
This show discusses weekly news, information, commentary, discussion, and debate about the effects of all role-playing game formats and their potential uses for professional, educational, recreational, and therapeutic goals. The RPG Talk Show is not about the latest modules and releases. There are plenty of sources for that information. We will mention such releases when related to the aforementioned topics, however. You can learn more about the RPG Talk Show, hosts, guests, and archives of previous episodes on our website at www.rpgtalkshow.com. You can follow us on Twitter at RPG Talk Show. You can catch our live show, as it is right now, on twitch.tv/RPG Research, now on Thursdays from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific Time, and chat with us during the live broadcast. RPG Research Patreon supporters can access the recorded episodes a month or more before they are available to the general public as a thank you for your support. Role-playing game formats we cover include the original Tabletop RPG, referred usually to as just RPG or TRPG, live-action role-playing, or LARP, computer-based, aka CRPG, and solo adventure books or modules, aka SABM. This episode is sponsored by the wonderful Patreon supporters for the nonprofit RPG Research, and we are also sponsored by RPG Therapeutics, LLC. You can learn more about RPG Research, the nonprofit 501c3 research and human services organization, studying the effects of all RPG formats and their potential to improve lives at www.rpgresearch.com, and about RPG Therapeutics, LLC, the for-profit professional services company, at www.rpgtherapeutics.com. Our show varies each week, but a typical format may include the latest general RPG news related to our focus on role-playing games and research, community response and discussion, RPG-related theory and application discussions, and the latest updates on RPG Research, the RPG Bus, the RPG Trailer, RPG Tour, Other Minds Magazine, Tolkien Moot, Tolkien, and all those other projects. Today is Thursday, November 1st, 2018, now 4:09 p.m. Pacific Time. And just a heads up for today's theory and application discussion topic of the week, we will be covering sex and eroticism in role-playing gaming. We will be keeping it still family-friendly, though it's a mature topic. We are, going to be careful and professional about our discussion. So, meanwhile, John, you have a couple of news items you'd like to cover before we go into that?
Well, first today's thing is a side note. It's not directly related to RPG, but I will bring it in. Satanic Temple takes legal action against Sabrina. This article is from ICV2 at icv2.com, and it's not very interesting to us as far as role-playing games that the Satanic Temple is suing Sabrina because they're using a statue of Baphomet that is a very, very close approximation to an actual statue that one of the followers of the Satanic Temple has designed and built. And so they're claiming copyright infringement.
Okay. But we don't, though we've done a whole topic on copyright infringement, that's not why we're bringing this up.
The main interest is I've been watching the show myself, and it brings up the representation in popular culture and to include role-playing games of real-world organizations, religions, and groups of people. In the Sabrina show, they are conflating Wicca with the Satanic Temple in a couple ways. One is Sabrina starts an after-school organization to support the women, and the acronym of their group spells out Wicca.
But that's probably like a humorous nod in a way, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Those who follow Wicca or anything, at best, would find it humorous.
Okay.
Somebody
not offensive or anything.
Right. Somebody outside of either one of those organizations would definitely be confused. Because Sabrina is half witch, and her witch half of her biology is all followers of the devil. They are devil worshippers.
That's not Wicca.
That's not Wicca.
Yeah.
That has
That's where they're conflating the two, Church
Correct.
of Satan and Wicca.
So
conflation
Sabrina starts a organization called Wicca, and her family's devil worshippers.
there. Okay, that would definitely confuse people.
Also, their use of symbolism, including on their statue of Bahamut, they have the 5-pointed star, the pentagram, and
But the wrong way.
it's the wrong way. The Church of Satan uses the point down. Wicca uses the point up. And it matters. Just as matters whether or not you have a cross with
Upside
the bars
down or
near the
not.
top or the bars near the bottom.
Right,
It's
right.
relevant.
Yeah, okay. That's good to know. And this show, I haven't watched it. This is not like the old Sabrina spin-off sitcom.
This is not PG-13.
It's not even PG-13, but remember the old sitcom they did with the blonde-haired
Oh,
girl?
yes,
where
and
it
the
was
talking cat.
cheesy? Yeah, it was very cheesy. This is nothing like that, right?
No, it is dark.
Okay. And is this, which station is this?
This is Netflix.
Oh, it's on Netflix. Oh, okay. Well,
It's a Netflix original.
Oh, that explains it. Yeah, now I understand.
Sabrina starts as 15 in the show and becomes 16.
Okay.
Like by the second episode, but they definitely show her as a sexual creature,
Okay.
or at least present her in a sexual way, which is awkward for having this a 15 or 16-year-old, even though the actress is actually 18.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So
it's
definitely
very
not
dark.
a kid show.
No.
And it's dark, and you said it's also gory too. Your wife,
Yeah, blood and guts do
yeah.
exist. There's literally a scene for an autopsy where somebody cuts out a heart and takes a bite out of it.
Okay.
And more dark than that is the person's actually cutting it out of his own body.
Right, because it's a dream sequence.
Yeah, dream sequence. So he's standing over his body doing an autopsy on himself. Just bizarre. But this representation of the Church of Satan, some of it they get right, some of the philosophies, some of it, of course, they get wrong because they are going for the dramatic,
Sensationalism.
the sensationalism,
and such,
the literal devil walking the earth type
yeah. Right.
procedures. But when we also get into
Mike,
role-playing
you're actually
games,
talking to the mic there.
as we get into role-playing games, representations of religions, there are especially the modern ones,
Right.
such as Vampire the Masquerade, will have representatives of Wicca, representatives of Satanists,
Right.
and things like that.
Well, and anything in role-playing gaming that often, and we're going to be talking about heavy topics. So heavy topics include morality, violence, politics, spirituality, sexuality. So all those things, we got the religion factor there. These are all things that can be challenging to discuss, and it's different in different cultures,
Right.
which we're going to talk a little bit about here with today's heavy topic on sex and role-playing games and such.
So I think that's enough about Sabrina without us going into a full
Yeah,
discussion
yeah.
of representation of different cultures
Okay.
in video and in all gaming.
Sure.
But I
And we
did
were
wanna bring
recently reached out to by some folks about using role-playing games for PTSD. There was a little blurb about Satine
Phoenix.
that they've been talking to her, and she'd been and we've been talking about PTSD and role-playing gaming for years. And I've been talking to different VA reps over the years, and I just, I've gone through a bunch of PTSD training through the VHA and such, and I just haven't quite had a chance to pull the trigger on implementing those programs because the VA is a little morass of paperwork. And when you're working with PTSD populations, that's a trickier population than some of the others. We work with brain injury and at-risk youth and many, many, many others. And PTSD has its own unique challenges, as every population does. But we have been steadily, over the years, building up resources and information related to using role-playing games with PTSD. I have run role-playing games for people with PTSD, but it's been as not a targeted PTSD program. It's that the participants acknowledged to me they had PTSD in their intake, but we weren't specifically, we were targeting other mental health issues. And then that was making me aware of those issues so that I was able to modify the game accordingly and be careful about certain things, ambience and other things like that. So it's taking PTSD into account. I've had clients who had PTSD.
Right.
I have not run role-playing games specifically to target PTSD, though I've had I keep getting more and more and more training on the topic. And part of it may be because of my own background with that, with my own struggles of PTSD and stuff like that. That may be part of my nervousness about going down that path. I really want to partner up with somebody who has a lot of PTSD treatment experience just in general in other areas that can help guide me through that process of creating a role-playing game program for that population to target that specifically. In fact, in the earliest days of the RPG Research Project back in 2003, when I was looking at alternative therapies instead of child psychology, a therapist friend of mine of decades that I really respect, Bill Hughes down in Salt Lake City, Utah, really, really recommended I consider using role-playing games for PTSD. And I was like, that's a lot. But he says, because he works a lot, he uses drum circles and flutes and other workshops, and he's a PhD psychologist and all this, and he's well respected by the Native American community. He's well respected by the vets. He's an awesome guy. He says it's really been a problem trying to find modalities that connect with all the different veterans, because veterans are diverse,
right?
And you need different modalities to connect with different people. There is no one size fits all, and he really thought this would be a powerful tool for it. And I've run into so many people who we all theoretically agree it seems like it would be. We've seen a little bit on video games and such using for PTSD. So the person who's asking for some articles, I will send them some articles. I do the research on this. But I have not created a formal program specifically targeting PTSD exclusively. It's always been as a comorbidity or something like that.
I think it's also going to be very hard to do an overall arching program for PTSD because triggers are so individual.
Yes, but there are universalities. It's going to depend on the type of PTSD also. So if you're dealing with veterans and it's combat related as opposed to rape or other topics.
Right.
So one of the best groups for that, for sexual abuse, would be the Bodana group over on the East Coast with Jack Birkenstock and company. They specialize in using games in general. They use a mindfulness approach. That's Bodana group. It's a Buddhist reference, etc. But they're licensed practitioners, therapists, and MSWs, etc. And they specifically work with clients who have abuse, PTSD issues, especially sexual abuse. And they work with perpetrators as well. Not simultaneously. These are two separate...
For obvious reasons.
Yes. But they work with both sides of the coin of that. And that's really remarkable. And so that's Jack and I have been in contact over the years about that. And he and I have some personal connections. We've shared some personal stories and such related to those topics.
And that's one of the things that a lot of people overlook as far as treating sexual abuse is treating the abuser.
Yeah, and some of them claim they can't be treated. Some of them choose some pretty extreme measures. And yeah, and this is a relevant topic. Before we get into it, because we're getting heavy here already.
Right.
But this is why we want to discuss this topic, because you need to be careful about PTSD. There's a relationship here between PTSD, sexual abuse, and then handling sexual topics in a game carefully, and X-Card and everything else. So before we jump into that, though, I've got a couple other topics. A reminder, I'm going to be at PAX Unplugged in Philadelphia, December 1st. So it's running November 30th, December 1st, December 2nd, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I'll be flying in Friday, be there all Friday, be on the panel Saturday, be there all day Saturday, fly back later Sunday. So if you want to meet, and you're at PAX, let me know. You can always email me, rpgresearcher@gmail.com. You can always call me on my cell phone, 509-481-5437, if you want to connect while I'm there. Or, of course, come to the panel. I forgot to have the panel link up here, but it's about accessibility and inclusiveness. And you're going to see, I'm going to start spamming. I'm going to start putting all over Twitter space and all of our websites a link to that panel. I'm going to ask if they'll let me at least record the audio, and but there's no guarantee. Some of these bigger conventions won't let you. Some do, some don't.
And even if they let us record it, doesn't mean they're going to allow us to broadcast.
Yeah. So, but yeah, so I'll be at PAX Unplugged, and it's thanks to Dr. B, Rafael Bocamatzo over in Seattle. He did the submission and asked if I wanted to be on that panel, and many thanks to him for that. It got approved, and so, yeah, that'll be happening. The only other thing we have coming up is Eagles Peak Schools Alternative School. We're presenting on the 14th.
Correct.
because they're interested in bringing role-playing games in potentially. So they're going to have a bunch of their staff there for us to talk about the potential uses of role-playing games to work with at-risk youth and such an educational setting, which I've been excuse me, I've been using role-playing games in educational settings for various populations since about 1985. So as far as educational settings, I've got a lot of background there. So that for me is an easy one. It works really well. Well, and from the RPG tour, talking to Rebecca down at the role play workshop in Oakland during the tour,
Right.
She's been doing it for 25 years, using role playing games to teach. She was a professional teacher, full-time teacher, and after a few years of using role playing games on the side, she quit her job as a teacher to become a full-time game master, paid, and she's made a living for the last 25 years as an instructor game master. Down in Oakland, and she is hiring. If you are interested in the Oakland area, she is looking to hire people and train people. She's has as many as 3 game masters under her being paid before, and she needs more. So, so that's going on, and we'll get links out over time. And let's make sure I'm not missing any comments here. Okay, and then so speaking about all these things and the tour and all of that. So over the past year, I've really put a lot of energy into publicity for RPG research. A lot. I've put a lot of money, personal money, and a lot of time into really, so RPG research I'd always just did as a project. It's something I stumbled across as I went into recreation therapy back in 03, 04, and realized that role-playing game was a great fit for recreation therapy, and I do music therapy as well. And it was mostly just me working with other organizations and individuals and private practitioners over the years. And some great programs and lots of people. I've worked with hundreds of people on these programs over the years. Then around 2015, my private practice side, the LLC's private practice, had gotten to a point where I was maxed out. I couldn't handle any more clients. I was maxed out on my hours. And, it made a decent income. My rates are comparable to my computer tech rates. So, it's 3 digits an hour. But I wanted to say yes to more clients. I wanted to say yes to facilities wanting me to come out and train them. Individuals and mothers of individuals and such really wanted me, and I was booked months out, and I really wanted to be able to help more people. And I was like, well, only option now is I need to hire somebody. So I posted clear back then on the various job sites and got very few legitimate applicants. Most of them were just not even related. If it was a game master, it was related to gambling.
Right.
They call them game masters at like the dealers and stuff like that. Some of those
What, dealer wasn't
masters.
a good enough name for him?
They call them game masters at some of them. So I got some that weren't even applicable. And then I got a handful. So I had hundreds of applicants I had to wade through that weren't even relevant. I found a handful that actually were, and they were like, is this real? Is this a real thing? And they're like, yes, this is a real thing. I'm like, well, what can I make? It's like, well, anywhere between 20 and 60 an hour, depending upon your qualifications and training and such. And they're like, wow, well, what do I need? I've got all this gaming background. I'm like, that's great, but do you have any therapeutic background? Do you have any educator background? Do you have any professional background? Nothing. There were a handful of others I ran into who were therapists who were intrigued by the gaming concept but had very little to no role-playing game experience. And then I've met another handful of people who were therapists who had gaming experience, but they had no idea how to do it in the way I want to do it, basically. Right? I got to train them, and they were more PhD theoretical people rather than necessarily good at designing programs and implementing programs. But I was interested in bringing them in. But then I ran into the thing like, well, I didn't have time to, because this is a whole employment law issue. I want to be able to train people, but you can't have employees train for free anymore.
Right.
And I didn't have time to not be billable for long periods of time. And it just a complicated mess. So basically, the short version is I couldn't find anybody qualified. There were a few close ones but they weren't anywhere, like they weren't even in the country, some of them. Like the close ones were not even close geographically, which, again, I can train people remotely, but that didn't help my practice here. And I had clients as far as Europe and such, that I remotely took care of.
Right, I remember a couple
secure
of
stuff. And so I was like, okay, this is a problem. There is an industry here that I want to provide services for. There is way more demand than I can handle. But I can't hire anybody. I'm stuck. So I slowly started wrapping up my contracts. And my first thought was I was just going to start saying yes to all these training programs that people wanted to pay me to train them at their facilities. But I realized that was just, they were going to, as I talked to them, it was clear they were just going to incorporate that into their programs. They weren't going to help me answer the plea for the clients that were coming to me.
Right.
And I wanted to help. It's great. I wanted to help them, and I'm happy to train them, and that's been great. But it didn't solve the staffing issue that I need to hire people that are already trained and qualified to do the work I need them to do. And there's no professional standards out there.
Yeah, because once they have trained personnel, they're keeping them.
Right. Well, and that's fine. We're more than happy to train other staff. We've been more than happy to do that. But it didn't solve my problem with my clients and such.
Exactly.
So then I was like, okay, I think I need to create an employee base here. I'm going to shift my focus because I was juggling between the for-profit private practice LLC and RPG Research Project. And RPG Research Project was always kind of ebb and flow. It was mostly me working with other organizations. But I was like, well, I need to bring other people on board. And not long after that time, we were starting to circle each other's orbits there. And so eventually decided, okay, let's make it a nonprofit. Let's actually bring in volunteers because I can train volunteers for free, however long they need to take while they do their day job. And train these people up, and then some of them are going to go off and do their own thing, and that's great. And then some of them can apply to the LLC, and now they will have a relevant background where I know that they're training and relevant, and I can decide whether to hire them there at the LLC or not. So you have to be very careful that they're separate,
right? But
at least it starts to create a base. And so we've had a lot of volunteers just in the past year. We're almost 40 people we've had on the training roster, 40 different people in the past year. I was looking through the roster, a year and a half. That we've had kind of come and go. Some are more committed than others, but that's a fair number of people that we've introduced to it, and then others have stayed on board the whole time. And you, of course, were volunteer number one, and now you're vice president.
I'm number one. I'm number one.
And well, anyway, so this past year, as we became 501c3 officially and all that, we got a board and everything. I worked really hard to try to raise the brand awareness of RPG research. And when we were at Fan Nexus, Ivan and Norman, took me aside and talked about what was working and not working. And I was really, struggling. Like, we're not getting nobody, like, researchers know about us, but nobody else knows about us. And donations were flat, and donations continue to be flat.
Right.
And I was asking for suggestions. So, well, first of all, you need to get out in front of the camera. You're behind the scenes on everything. Nobody knows who you are. You need to put a person out there. People connect with a person, not a concept. It's like, and I was a professional photographer. I love facilitating and being behind the scenes and enabling things to happen. I love watching things come to life, ideas come to life. I've started up magazines, I've started up groups, and I love watching that. But it's about an idea and seeing it come to life, and then other people enjoying it, and I think that's awesome. And then especially when it helps people, like I've seen with role-playing gaming, where it makes their lives better. That's awesome. It was never about me wanting publicity. I have an information security nut, and prior to this, I really had a very small cyber footprint.
You did notice he gave his phone number out over the line.
Yeah, I really changed. Well, it's a phone number, but I've had to really make a change to try to get this out there. But whereas I can be a good salesperson, I've never liked doing the sales side. I love running games and doing programs and helping people and watching their lives get better and watching the light come on and all that. I don't like being in front of the camera, but it's a necessary evil, if you will. But I was a little disturbed to come across a forum posting that was saying that they thought it was all about my ego and everything else. And that kind of hurt because it couldn't be farther from the truth. But so this past year, worked really hard, been in front of the camera, been putting my name out there to try to then link it to RPG research to get more volunteers and get donors. Now, the volunteer side has been great. We've been getting tons of volunteers who believe in what we're doing and want to help others, and we're training them, and that's going really well. Donor side, it's been flat. We're at about the same amount per month as we were last year. after a year. This road trip cost me $7,000 out of my own pocket between all the costs leading up to it, during, since, and I'm still digging out the hole. We raised a few hundreds of dollars for the nonprofit.
Yeah, the return on investment is really just not showing up.
Yeah. So we're going to keep doing what we're going to do. I've been doing it all along. I can keep self-funding it. We got our donors that we have. Thank you so much for helping keep this happen. You're helping cover like the background costs for volunteers. You're helping us be able to keep this going without completely, draining every penny I have. But I'm going to go back to my roots, and that is doing the work. That's doing the research, and that's doing the community programs. And then we'll share where we can. We'll keep putting it out. Our Patreon supporters will get early access to all of that. Other than this PAX Unplugged, I don't really have anything else planned, publicly. Things come up, people ask and invite. If they invite us, great. But I'm really going to I've spent so many hours this past year doing publicity and fundraising. And other than lots of volunteers, which is great, so that's good. Mm-hmm. And that's got momentum, and I want that momentum to continue. But it's been costing far more than it's been raising and fundraising. And I'd be better off just putting my money straight into RPG research than the indirect route. I'd hoped after a year it would pick up. The final blow is what just happened with Google this week. That's just like, you got to be kidding me.
Google practically attacked you.
Yeah. So anyway, so I'm going back to the original efforts, doing the work. We will always welcome the donations. The infrastructure will still all be there, but I'm going to focus on training the volunteers so we can do more work, so we can help more people, get more research out there. I'm going to work on the books more. I'm going to get all this backlog. I've got a huge backlog of research I haven't finished. I've got book chapters I got to finish. So I'm going to get back to that because all this publicity stuff has just been taking it away from what I really want to do. And on the LLC side, as we spin that back up, the charter for my LLC, for RPG Therapeutics LLC, is 20% of profits go to support RPG research. So I'll just do it the indirect way. I mean, right now it's it's a lot of my own money anyway. But that'll help keep that research going and keep it going indefinitely. But I got to ramp up the LLC. The good thing is now there's starting to be people out there that I might be able to hire. John, for one. So that's where I'm going to be putting all that time. I'm really not going to be spending that much time going to cons, public speaking tours. Maybe John and others can do more of that. But I'd really rather get back to being behind the scenes and facilitating and doing the research and making the community programs and watching people's lives get better. But we'll still do this. We're still going to do Heroes in the Mist. We're still going to do the talk show because we've got a routine going here and it's important and we're putting out content and sharing with you. But just wanted people to know that. Title is wrong show. This is RPG Talk Show.
I see RPG Talk Show, RPG Research, donate follow, RPGTalkshow.com.
Stream should be in tabletop RPGs if you want to discuss all RPGs, not D&D category. D&D should be D&D only. That's why they made the generic tabletop RPGs category for everything. Oh, that's new. They didn't used to have the generic tabletop RPG. But we are going to talk about D&D as well. So who's Shadzar? So, all right, well, we'll look into that. It says RPG research is playing Dungeons & Dragons. Oh, the Nightbot. Okay, well, we'll tell our mods they need to fix that. I think one of our mods is tuned in, so if he can fix that, that would be appreciated. Yeah. Thank you for the feedback. We're still getting the hang of all that. And so speaking of the streaming stuff, that's something, the other topic before we get into the heavy one is from a fellow Daniel in Brazil who actually just joined as a volunteer. We were talking, I've spoken a number of times, I don't really relate to watching other people do role-playing games.
Right.
I enjoy doing them, but it's a market and people enjoy it. And so he says in his little blurb here, it's often puzzling to some that, and some would be we, people watch streams of other people playing games, be they computer games or RPGs. The comparison between such a phenomenon and sports does explain it to some measure. By the way, I don't like to watch sports either.
Right.
I've played lots of different sports, basketball, volleyball, and rugby, and soccer, and martial arts, and many other things. I've never enjoyed really watching, maybe if I was doing some specific training, but I never enjoyed it for entertainment value. Yeah. That's just me.
Strangely enough, people do watch things like darts and poker and...
Yeah, golf.
Golf.
You bet. And I get it for people who are professionals that are trying to get better and they're looking for technique and stuff, but the rest of the armchair quarterbacks and stuff, it's like, okay, well, it's vicarious, it's living vicariously, and I really like to be doing it. But role-playing gaming, I'm happy to do the vicarious living.
My sports show is Forged in Fire, Knife or Death, and it's a knife obstacle course.
Okay.
So you have to cut your way through this obstacle course. That's my sport.
Okay.
To watch on TV.
Yeah, and it is. Yeah, it's showing Heroes of the Mist 6 to 9 p.m. God, okay, something's not right. I changed everything on the other station. That should have all updated differently. I don't know why it's not. I probably have to update that third. We've got 4 stations running here, and I think I missed one of them. I'll try to fix that in the future. Our other assistant tech volunteers have been out of town. So anyway, so it goes on about some find it educational, interested in RPGs and such, possible, but I think it's something wider as well. And we have who was it who was talking about how watching? Somebody last week was talking about it was because they were watching role-playing games on Critical Role and others that they got into role-playing gaming. So it definitely does inspire people. Yeah. He says a stream with a chat room, a video focus, often becomes a loose interest-based community. In effect, it replicates the social dynamics of a bunch of friends hanging out at someone's home to play video games with a max of 4 controllers. Some take turns. Others just enjoy watching to share the moment with friends and shoot the fecal matter, as it were. Some people like commenting on what happens, feeling rewarded when the people on the screen acknowledge them and interact. Others are passive, staying cozy at home or busily commuting and finding the stream to be a break from the tedium of the everyday, the reinvention of the radio. I say this as someone who watches streams occasionally, but who mostly watches VODs from streams, videos on demand, such as Vinesauce and others, gaming streams mostly. This dynamic can and has been harnessed by RPG research further and...
Dear?
Yeah, I got a typo there. And use of it could be worth it, though care might be needed lest it have unintended consequences. So, yeah, so that's a nice little commentary from our community about it, and we welcome your comments on it as well about why you find it entertaining to watch others running role-playing games. We have our Sunday show from 6 to 9, Heroes of the Mist, running Advanced Dungeons & Dragons First Edition. And, that's a live, real play game with audience interaction. And then Mondays and Thursdays, we're running various games. So like today, from 6 to 9, we're going to be running a one-shot, and then we're going to be starting Twilight 2000, just because a lot of people in the group aren't familiar with Twilight 2000.
Right.
And so we're always running all sorts of different ones. And then we have our theory and other discussions. But yeah, it's something I don't personally relate to. I get that other people enjoy it, and so we're putting it out there. And it's been a learning process as well, and it adds to my body of research to be able to discuss those topics from both ends of that. I've been on multiple game streaming shows with the Spartan Show and others, as a player and as a game master, and I've watched. We got front page on Twitch, with the Spartan Show multiple times. So there's clearly a demand. But it's not something I personally relate to, and it's definitely an interesting topic to delve into deeper about why that motivates others. Thank you, Daniel, for that. And Daniel couldn't join us. They had a family emergency, so best wishes to him and his family there. But he's one of our newest volunteers, and he joined from Brazil. He's remoting in from Brazil just this week. So this week, we're going to start on a series of discussions about sex and sexuality and eroticism in role-playing gaming. Today's show will only briefly cover the high-level topics and some notable resources for more information for those who want to go deeper. Pulling up my notes here. And so as I said earlier, some of the most difficult topics of discussion, depending on your culture and placement within that culture, for people in mixed or casual company include morality, politics, spirituality, violence, and sexuality. Today's coverage of the topic related to sexuality and eroticism in role-playing games will only be a very cursory introduction to the topic due to the constraints of our 1-hour time limit for the RPG Talk Show. And we're also keeping it professional and family safe, so it's a mature topic, but it's not something, it would be no worse than watching a PBS broadcast or something that doesn't, that parents are okay with their kids being there, etc. So
we'll be lighter than Dr. Ruth.
Oh yes, much lighter than Dr. Ruth Westheimer. Definitely, we will not be going that specific at all. lots of fade to black and stuff. So.
Lots of veils and lines.
Yes.
Later.
So we will briefly touch on the various topics related to this field of research in gaming, and some resources that people interested in learning can check out for a more in-depth understanding. We are also, as I said, for this episode, going to try to keep the discussion within the bounds of family friendly, so we don't have to bump the stream into adults only mode.
Right.
We may have to do that for separate broadcasts when we go deeper into this topic other times. Now, we're just going to cover this lightly and give you some great reference material and just give you a quick cursory overview of what is available out there. If you would like us to go deeper and make this a series that goes into deeper discussions, we are happy to do so based on your feedback. So we're going to keep jumping from topic to topic in this show every week until we get topics that people say, hey, can you go back and cover this topic? Because we've got so much content to cover. But we want to go with the show, because this is the RPG Talk show. We want our audience members to help drive where we go deep. And so we're going to keep putting things out here, and if it doesn't catch on, great. We'll move on to another topic and another topic and another topic. We could do that for years and keep coming up with original content.
We will never run out of things to say.
I've got at least 20 years of content I can cover. So let us know, either in Twitch or on Twitter or through email on our website. Let us know. And we have been having some technical issues with the website. I made a lot of progress the last 2 days on that, but we're still ironing those out. So let's see. So you can, if you want more, if you would like to request that we go deeper and make this a series and cover more in-depth information, send email to rpgresearcher@gmail.com or on Twitter at rpgresearch. We are considering putting together a special episode or series of episodes on this topic, as well as other controversial topics from the aforementioned list of morality, politics, spirituality, and violence in role-playing games.
RPG Talk Show After Dark.
Yeah, I don't want to do the After Dark, but maybe some title related to RPG Talk Show in depth or something like that, where we go a deep topic,
deep cuts, deep delve,
something like that. So we'll start with another comment from Daniel, who again he wanted to be on the show today, but because of a family emergency couldn't make it, and he has a pretty lengthy email about this topic. We're not going to read through the whole thing. We're just going to hit on a few highlights that bring up some interesting topics. And then I'm actually going to read some excerpts straight from Sexuality in Role-Playing Games by Ashley M.L. Brown. This is from Routledge Advances in Game Studies. So because it's Routledge, it's ridiculously overpriced. They're notorious for gouging customers. Because I know what publishing costs. I've worked in the publishing industry for years. Either they're doing something really wrong or they're gouging people, because the costs are through the roof, and it doesn't cost that much to publish, especially a book that small. I can't recommend the publisher and the price point. Maybe a used copy would be fine, but the content will focus on that. So Daniel says, I'm of the opinion that eroticism in any medium is made a bigger deal than it should be. The fact it's even a topic, whereas what combat and violence are viewed as a given in many RPGs is a thing to note. It's a cultural thing, no doubt, a reflex of how in America, I remember he's in Brazil, violence and blood in media is considered normal and nudity is generally considered more controversial, whereas in Europe it's the opposite. That's not meant to be a criticism of either cultural one more or the other. To the extent that a culture is an amalgamation of the preferences of those who take part in it, it's a preference, and those must be taken into consideration when creating stories for a given public. And he states that he's got a lot of background related to erotic role-playing games and such, online and elsewhere. And we won't go into all that detail. But he brings up an excellent point, which is one of the early points I want to say, is about the cultural differences and why we want to cover these other more controversial topics maybe separately in more depth.
Right.
You're right. The violence thing is a thing. Violence is more accepted here in media and television here in the United States, but it is definitely a controversial topic. It goes back decades about violence in media and such, and violence in role-playing games. I mean, that's part of how the movements against role-playing games got them banned, was talking about the representations of violence here in the States.
And that started with the comic books.
And we got the comic books issues as well. I don't know what it started with, but it's all... it goes. I mean, it goes back since there's been film and media and magazines and newspapers and books, and you can go back centuries. So it's been an ongoing topic with violence in the U.S. as well as other cultures. But again, today we're going to focus on the section. So the foreword in this book, Sexuality in Role-Playing Games, by Ashley M.L. Brown, which also gives a background of who that person is. Says role-playing games offer a chance to pretend, make believe, and share fantasy. They often invoke heavy themes into their gameplay, such as morality, violence, politics, spirituality, or sexuality. Although interesting moral debates perennially appear in the media and academia concerning the appropriateness of games' ability to deal with such adult concepts, very little is known about the intersection between games, playfulness, and sexuality, and what this might mean for players. Now, again, I wouldn't say there's very little, but it's certainly, role-playing games specifically, it hasn't been as deep as it should be. This book offers an in-depth ethnographic look into the phenomenon of erotic roleplay through the experiences of players in multiplayer and tabletop role-playing games. Brown explores why participants engage in erotic roleplay, discusses the rules involved in erotic roleplay, and uncovers what playing with sexuality in ludic environments means for players, their partners, and their everyday lives. Taken together, this book provides a rich, nuanced, and detailed account of a provocative topic. Ashley M.L. Brown is a lecturer in digital games theory and design at Brunel University, London. She completed her PhD at the University of Manchester in sociology in autumn 2013. She volunteers as a secretary for the Digital Games Research Association, DIGRA, and is a founding member of the recently created UK chapter of DIGRA, D-I-G-R-A, which I've peripherally heard of them, but haven't seen a whole lot from them. And so this book is dedicated to participants who made the research possible, and the first publication was 2015. So the topics, the table of contents, let's see if anybody, no comments there so far. Okay. And Twitter. All right. The table of contents include 1, finding the erotic in roleplay, 2, sex games and sex games, 3, erotic role players, 4, multiple frames, 5, the role of rules, 6, ERP IRL, so ERP is erotic roleplay.
In real life. And
IRL is in real life. 7, the future of erotic roleplay. And then she has a ludography, a bibliography, and an index, which is interesting. So it opens with a scene from inside World of Warcraft, which is an elf running around, took a back road, and came across 2 dwarves going at it. You know, doing the texting and
right.
They took all their clothes off, so they were just in their underwear, and they were emoting and texting to each other. And that got her going, this is a thing? What the heck? What do they get out of this? And started her down the path of researching. So that's kind of the first page, what it covers there. It kind of shocked her, it embarrassed her, but it also triggered interest. And she spent 4 years on this dissertation researching this topic. So this is based on 4 years worth of work and research. And she tried to just put it aside, but it just kept coming up for her. So that first experience was 9 years ago, and that's in 2015. Made her curious and wondered what brought them together, what made them want to do something like that. What was the sexual appeal of the game's stylized and cartoonish avatars? What she had witnessed was erotic roleplay, often abbreviated as ERP. And it turns out from her research it's quite common. And we know a lot of people have done that. I mean, I don't do that, but I know of people as far as the World of Warcraft and stuff. I mean, it comes up in Big Bang Theory. There's a whole episode where Wallowitz or somebody, the phrase they use is you click that troll's brains out or that dwarf's brains out or something. I walked in on you were clicking her brains out. Click, 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 whatever. And I think it was Wallowitz got busted doing erotic roleplay in World of Warcraft or something.
Okay.
So it's well enough to know that they decided to bring it up in Big Bang Theory. Although, again, that's not the best source. I mean, I have a lot of issues with Big Bang Theory and its misrepresentation of role-playing gaming. But that's a whole other show. In fact, I've written a whole article on that, which actually got a response from the co-producer of Felicia Day's The Guild.
Right.
Because I
You
was
said
telling them
lighten
to
up.
knock off. I was telling them to knock off the misrepresentations of gamers and being always dysfunctional and stuff. And she basically said, "Well, that makes good comedy." I'm like, well, it's a cop out. It's the easy way out. It's easy to pick on people without adding the complexity. Again, I love the guild. I've had a lot of fun with it. I'd like to see the bar get raised. So anyway, so she learned that this was often done to build a narrative and relationship between characters to add an emotional depth to their individual legends. So she wondered where rules and boundaries governing what is acceptable behavior in erotic roleplay, wondering what they were, and wondered what meanings, if any, these interactions had for players. So she talks about how she started with Dungeons and Dragons and then also World of Warcraft, and saw a lot of sexual content here and there available, in addition to body plots. A number of role-playing guidebooks and handbooks with hundreds of rules to guide players in their inclusion of sexual content. Even found an entire book dedicated to providing players with background for how to incorporate erotic gameplay into role-playing sessions, replete with detailed charts dictating which dice to roll to determine sexual performance or the likelihood of conception by pairings of various fantasy races. It also has STDs and everything too, right? Yep. And so really wanted to think about the social connections and implications that the activity may have for those who chose to play with it. So this book emerged out of a research project spanning 4 years. Topics relating to sexuality and the erotic, as erotic roleplay is, or are usually entrenched within taboo, often particularly open to misrepresentation or otherwise having their activities misread within a larger societal context of what constitutes normal behavior. Erotic roleplay can also be defined in multiple ways, and it goes into that. So, let's talk a little bit about that book then, because we brought that. Again, I've got a whole other stack of books here. If we go deeper, I've got lots of sources here between here and here that we can go into a lot more depth on the topic.
And I can grab all off the shelf.
All of these cover the topic in some way or another. In addition to this book.
I think the first representation in a role-playing game might be as far back as Beck Me was the succubus presented in Beck Me. I know it wasn't first edition.
If we go back to the original D&D, they got grief for the artwork in there because it showed in the original booklet, D&D, a naked woman on an altar,
right,
to be sacrificed and such. So now we just hit on both topics that we just covered today. Yeah. And they got a lot of grief for that. And they, you'll notice in the reprint they put different artwork on that was much tamer and safer. They changed the cover art on the original D&D printing, but it goes back to the original D&D. Sexuality was an issue in there, and not really covered, but there, the artwork if nothing else. And yes, a succubus if nothing else. How do you play a succubus or an incubus in a campaign? It's a legitimate demonic creature that is, could totally, trick your characters into doing things they might not otherwise want to do. How are you going to play that as a game master? You got to be really careful. We talk about the PTSD and sexual abuse and stuff. So here's the first thing I want to just cover. If you want to bring ERP, erotic role-playing, into your group, have an upfront discussion first.
Your session 0, it better be thorough.
Right. Well, I mean, even if it's some years later, whatever, you've got a group, you built a good rapport, you kept ERP out of it, it was fade to black, maybe a little flirting at most, but you've decided you want to up the ante, you've built enough comfort with, they become gamer friends, right? Some may be more than gamer friends, that you want to broach the topic. Do it outside of the, before the game or whatever, say, hey, everybody, I've been debating this is kind of a touchy topic, and I want everybody to really be candid and open here because I don't want to step in a landmine. How do you feel about having sex in our games? How do you feel about eroticism in our games? And have a mature discussion about it. Now, obviously, this is not for little kids. And teenagers will do it anyway without any of the structure. They're going to experiment with this. But where would you rather they experiment with the sexuality? In a role-playing game where their characters might get STDs, but they won't. Or go out there and really experiment. I would much rather they did that in the context of the role-playing game. Now, could it be that they then, go over here and still do it anyway because teenagers being teenagers, they're going to do what they're going to do? Okay, that's a whole other thing. But it at least gives them a safe place to try these things out and see what they like and don't like. But with a more mature group, with an older group, with adults and such, have a discussion, have a mature adult discussion up front. Don't slip it into the game without checking first. And give them a chance to reply privately, because the whole peer group thing,
Right.
you might get people nodding and going along when they're really not comfortable. So in the conversation, say, how do you guys feel about this right now? Let's talk about this. And you may get people just go, oh yeah, I'm fine with it. It frustrates the heck out of me. I get it with some of the groups where people just go, oh yeah, I don't have anything to say. I'm like, I get that you're uncomfortable in front of everybody right now, but I know you're thinking more than that. You know?
You have something to say. So.
And so if you have anybody who doesn't speak their mind in the group, that you have any concern that they might just be going along to get along, and especially if you're a more male dominant group than female, or vice versa, or whatever dominant group, say, I would also like to talk to each of you individually, privately, about this, because I don't want, in case anybody's uncomfortable, I want to know. Or slip me a note or send me an email. Just let me know if you'd rather we didn't do this. And I won't out you or anything. I just want to know up front if this is something we want to bring into our game. Whether it's a live action game, which is a whole other topic, which is covered, by the way.
Right.
Because LARP often involves touching and physical contact. So there's a whole thing about simulated sexuality that only involves the arms in LARP and such.
Okay.
In tabletop, we never touch each other, right? Touching is verboten in tabletop. There's camaraderie and stuff, but you want to make sure you're okay with that. LARP physical contact is very common. You still want to be careful and know what the rules are, but it's very common in LARP. And then with computer-based, there generally isn't any contact, physical contact in real life, but there is through the virtual world. So again, make sure you know your audience and don't be afraid to bring it. If you try to just integrate it and see what happens, you could very well lose your group, or worse. Don't be the rapey GM. When it comes to like rape topics, you can bring up heavy, difficult topics like rape in a game, but you better make sure you're doing it with the right audience, and you better make sure you do it in a way that it's safe enough for them.
Right.
If you're going to not just fade to black, or not just describe it in a clinical, well, you see a such and such being raped, what do you guys do? As opposed to going into a little more detail and such about that, you better darn well know your audience. So I cannot emphasize enough, don't just bring it in because you think it'll be interesting and titillating and all of that. Have the conversation before you do it. And give it time. Don't do it that game. Don't spring it on everybody and say, today we're going to be incorporating this. Is everybody okay with this? Great, let's go.
Exactly.
Because again, people give into peer pressure. Bring it up weeks or months before you intend to bring it into your campaign. And be ready to not incorporate it. Be ready for there being at least one person who is not comfortable with it.
And if there is one person who's not covered, then you need... what's the best word for this?
You can modify it to fit what they're comfortable with.
Going to
Find
the lowest
threshold.
common denominator without saying the lowest common denominator. Go for the person who's the least uncomfortable and go for their level.
Right.
Also, be aware of bleed.
Right.
When you start getting to the erotic stuff, bleed can literally bleed into your real
People
life.
get very confused. If your character's hitting on another character, the player might interpret that as you as a player flirting with the other player and using this as a proxy.
Right.
And maybe that is the case. I mean, that certainly has been the case. There's plenty. I mean, how many people meet each other through a common activity, right? It does happen all the time. Lots of people have met spouses through their game and stuff like that.
It was actually before I started in Vampire, the Camarilla live action role playing, I had seen articles where places in San Francisco where people treated the role playing game as a excuse to hook up.
Sure. Yep. And again, if everybody's in agreement, more power to you. So I'm going to cover a little bit more of this book, and then we're going to have to wrap up because we're running out of time.
Again.
But I'm just giving everybody kind of a little taste of this, what it covers, and this is just the surface. This is just the tiniest little fraction of topics we could cover. But at least it starts the conversation. And if you would like us to go deeper with this, like we've been doing with Good Game Mastering, with Robin's Laws and such,
right,
where I'll do an in-depth, heavily highlighted excerpts, in-depth discussion from multiple sources, and we welcome your input. And it's a discussion. We'd love having community discussions. let us know again, rpgresearcher@gmail.com, or tweet at us that you would like to see more episodes on this topic. Otherwise, we'll just move on to another topic. That's fine. We've got plenty of others. So, defining erotic roleplay. Erotic roleplay can take many forms, from tabletop games and live-action roleplay to their digital counterparts. Any type of roleplay has the potential to become erotic. Its loosest definition, erotic roleplay is a form of roleplaying that involves erotic themes. That's a circular definition. Dressing up in sexy costumes such as a police officer and a speeding driver to involve power scenarios and sexual play could be considered a type of erotic roleplay. But this type of erotic play is not covered by the research presented here. Whilst erotic roleplay's definition can be wide enough to encapsulate a variety of activities, it is used in this book in a very specific way, predominantly used to reflect a participant-defined activity that involves the incorporation of sexual or erotic content into pre-existing roleplay scenarios in digital or tabletop role-playing games. These games exist independently of the erotic content taking place. That's the key factor here. There are games and activities that are all about sex. There are porn role-playing games and VR and all of that. And that's all it's about, is the sex. We are not talking about that. We are talking about a role-playing game that's narrative, story-driven, and you want to incorporate ERP into it. So, very important distinction. So, further elaboration. Erotic roleplay differs from virtual sex and cybersex in the electronic medium. So here's some of the differentiation. Cybersex has been defined as a social interaction between at least two persons who are exchanging real-time digital messages in order to become sexually aroused and satisfied, during 2004, page 863. Likewise, past research into multi-user dungeons found virtual sex consists of two or more players typing descriptions of physical actions, verbal statements, and emotional reactions for their characters. Turkle, 1995, page 223. For many, erotic roleplay is seen as contributing to a deeper narrative that is meaningful for both the player and the character. An emphasis on the narrative. Right. Such a narrative is cohesively built with respect to a game's overarching story and interactions with other player characters and even non-player characters. Here's a quote from Penp, personal interview with Penp, so one of the participants that the author here liked. Roleplay of an erotic nature, but I would caution those unfamiliar to the difference between ERP and cybersex. Cybering is the exchange of sexually suggestive sentences, specifically to sexually excite the other person and yourself. ERP is more of a natural progression of a storyline between fictional characters. So these are some important distinctions. Erotic roleplay is about narrative, story, relationships between characters, and play. And I wanted to pull this up because I realized people are going to need this definition defined. The importance of story, diegetic believability, and staying in character. So diegetic is from diegesis, and it's Greek. It's the narration. It's doing the narrative style.
Right.
But I'll read it here from Wikipedia. Is a style of fictional storytelling that presents an interior view of a world in which details about the world itself and the experiences of its characters are revealed explicitly through narrative. The story is told or recounted as opposed to shown or enacted. There is a presumed detachment from the story of both the speaker and the audience. In diegesis, the narrative tells the story. The narrator presents the actions and sometimes thoughts of the characters to the readers or audience. Diegetic elements are part of the fictional world, part of the story, as opposed to non-diegetic elements, which are stylistic elements of how the narrator tells a story, part of the storytelling.
Right.
So that's just so you understand that, because I realize people are going to need that definition. So in the flesh, tabletop role-playing game occurs in the flesh, and that all participants are physically present and co-located in the same physical and geographical location. For LARP, so researchers, for example, have looked at Ars Amandi, ARS space AMANDI, Ars Amandi system for including sexual content into LARPs, live action role-playing games.
So as actually having the rules.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so Arzamondi uses the hands and arms of consenting players along with breathing and eye contact to simulate intercourse. LARP researcher Lizzie Stark, 2011, interviewed Emma Weidslander, the creator of Arzamondi, for her blog and discussed the importance of having a system to simulate sexual interactions, especially when most gaming systems tend to focus exclusively on violence. So that's specifically for LARP. You wouldn't want to use it in tabletop. And then they go into more depth about that. So that's something to check into.
Rule.
Exactly. J. Tuomas Harviainen, I don't know if that's Finnish or Swedish. I think it's Finnish. Harviainen, 2011, makes the argument. So this is also people talk, when you say fantasy role-playing, people who are either being snarky or really don't know think you're talking about sexual role-playing.
Right.
So this covers some topics about defining why. So outside the boundaries of what might typically be thought of as games, dress-up sex and BDSM, bondage, domination, sadomasochistic, might be thought as a type of role-play. In fact, despite the tendency to think of games, toys, and play predominantly in terms of childhood activities, a variety of adult activities involve games, toys, and playful types of sexuality. The costumes found year-round in adult shops are often thematically similar to those found during Halloween, which just happened yesterday. The costumes often center on roles or occupations that deliberately provoke a power dynamics, such as a speeding driver and a police officer, housekeeper and a homeowner, nurse and doctor, student and teacher. These costumes invite their wearers to temporarily take on the role of the occupation or situation represented through their clothing. It is in this way that these costumes function is similar to their Halloween counterparts. It encourages, or at least provides, a medium through which roleplay can occur. On a basic level, such costumes upset or inflate the power dynamics present in a relationship by allowing other wearers to take on the role or persona represented by the costume. Once the costume is taken off and the session ends, the costume-based roleplay ends, and those playing the roles resume their everyday identity. It's the same thing with a tabletop game. You're in character, you're playing what the character does. As soon as the game over, you don't interact that way. Same thing with LARP, etc. The costuming and setting involved with BDSM play likewise involves a play with power. From collars and leashes to furniture designed to look and function like a dungeon or torture chamber, the undercurrent of BDSM speaks to an imbalance of power. For the duration of a scene or session, practitioners undertake the role of a dominant or submissive, master, slave, etc., etc., etc. After the session is complete, participants return to their existing roles, and the existing power structures between participants is also reasserted. In both cases of costuming and erotic play, a case of using costumes for erotic play and BDSM, the temporary undertaking of identities for the purposes of enjoyment can be thought as a type of game. So J. Tuomas Harviainen, I'm sorry for the pronunciation, 2011, makes the argument that BDSM is a type of live-action role play and argues for its consideration as a type of game. So he goes on about length at that. Right. However, this book is not going to go into that part of the argument. But it's worth noting there is some debate about where are the boundaries. And again, know your audience. Define these boundaries with your participants. That's the most critical aspect of all of these topics. The defining
aspect is the rules.
Yep. Clearly defining rules. Exactly. Yeah. That's the key thing, and that everybody's on the same page with the rules. So that is just a tiny little sliver, but we're pretty much out of time at this point. And so we hope you enjoyed this. Now, again, this book, if you want to go ahead and pick it up, Sexuality in Role-Playing Games by Ashley M.L. Brown by Routledge Advances in Game Studies. We've got quite a few other topics. And then the other book that we showed here.
Book of Erotic Fantasy.
Yeah, so that one it is out of print, although the PDF's floating around, whatever, and I don't know if they make it available to buy as PDF. We can't really open the pages because there's a lot of adult photos.
I can open the pages, I just have to be very selective.
Right, there's a lot of photography in there, a lot of nudity and such. So it is definitely, adults only. Now, quickly touch on the other topics. Why did you bring the other books? Why did you bring those other books on this topic?
Okay, well,
before we wrap up,
I wanted to bring the Book of Vile Darkness and the Book of Exalted Deeds, which were actually done by Wizards of the Coast.
Right.
Mont Cook.
So the others are a third party.
Correct.
These are actually Wizards of the Coast, the owners of
and they don't actually go into depth of the ideas of sexuality and things like that, but it was mature content being presented just before Book of Erotic Fantasy came out. The other book I brought, Mordecai's Tome, because sexuality in games goes beyond the acts of having sex and the consequences thereof, but also gender identity. So in Mordecai's Book of Foes, there is a discussion of the Blessed of Corleon and literal gender fluidity, where some elves have the ability to change gender on a daily basis. So people
Or
can
seasonal transition.
That one of the players on my table has decided that they're going to do it on a seasonal basis as opposed to a daily basis, because it fits her character's. It's an Eldarian elf who are highly connected to the changes of the seasons. So that's why she made that role-playing decision.
And again, as long as everybody's on board with that, great.
Right. So that's a place that people can experiment with their own sexuality, their concepts, or put on a different coat for a while, as so to speak. A little bit beyond the mechanics, but it's something to be talked about when you're talking about erotic fantasy.
And for those of you looking at incorporating these things, so I have for years incorporated consequences to sexual activity. So whether it was as teenagers or whether it was as adults, if they decide their character wants to have sex, we may fade to black. We may not go into any detail. They just say, yeah, and it's in the Gamers to Darkness Rising. The bard has 20 ranks in seduction and is having sex with one of the fellow characters, the sorceress, one of the other fellow player characters, is the first one. And then barmaids and priestesses with vows of celibacy, all these things.
Not necessarily in that order, but yes, that's exactly what happens.
Yeah, and so they don't, they illustrate them walking off the stage or going behind an altar or whatever. So it's, it's represented but not shown. And, and it was annoying to the other players. So again, you need to be careful about that. But I always rolled for pregnancy and STDs. Every single time. Every time they did that, all right, go ahead. Go for it. Okay, let's roll for the result. Scale of 1 to 10, how was it? All right, and then let's see if you impregnated somebody, and then let's see if you picked up an STD. And then I may not tell them, but I'll tell them, save versus disease. And they're like, oh. Oh, that.
Right.
So, because I like to have everything in my games, I like to have consequences to actions.
In the Book of Erotic Fantasy, there are percent chances of becoming pregnant, everything from
different cross species, right?
Cross species, whether or not species A can impregnate species B, etc. It bounds from everything, like only if they're in season,
right,
because they're a cat person,
yeah.
To celestials who just say yes or no about whether or not they're pregnant. Venereal disease, sexually transmitted diseases are presented in here. There are saving throws for them, consequences of receiving them. But the decision about whether or not a person has the disease is part of the NPC makeup. So the DM is supposed to decide ahead of time whether or not that person is infected, not a random roll.
Okay.
Which you could do.
That's more in depth, yeah, exactly. Right. Again, it depends on how deep you want to take these topics. So again, we've given you a very brief cursory discussion. If you'd like more and you'd like us to maybe do a special series on this, we're happy to do so. We'd like to get some other people on the show to discuss it as well. Excuse me. And but we need to know that there's actually interest. Otherwise, we'll hit some of the other controversial topics. Morality, politics, violence, spirituality and religion, etc.
Appropriation, etc.
Yeah, we're not afraid to take on the more controversial topics. It's not our primary focus, but again, it's all relevant. We have to take all these things into account with all our research. They all overlap and interconnect. So, that's just part of doing good research, is being open to keeping account of all the variables that you can. There's so many confounds, and you can never track all of them, especially with something as multivariate as role-playing gaming. But you still have to give it your best effort and slowly accumulate the data and then share. So thank you very much for joining us. John, is there anything else you wanted to cover before we wrap up?
Nope, just please write us. Let us know what more you want to be talked about, and please join the conversation.
And then we're going to be back in less than an hour from 6 to 9. We're going to be running that one-sheet game as kind of a homage to yesterday's Halloween, where you play a character who died and is coming back for revenge. And we'll be playing that briefly. And then after that, we're going to do an introduction to the old classic game, Twilight 2000, which is a military survival game. It was written in 1980, so it's based on the old Soviet era, Cold War era, that in the year 2000 the missiles flew. But it's not like Gamma World, which is mutation. It's a more partial nuclear war pretty real. It's a realistic, gritty military survival game, and you all start out as, depending on where you start, but the default adventure, you're all surrounded by Soviet bloc, Polish and Russian tanks, and you have to escape. And the last orders from your commander was, "Good luck, you're on your own." And you have to break out and then survive and live off the land. And if you want to keep your vehicles running, you have to steal your own gas from grass clippings and what have you, and methanol and ethanol. And some people decide to become marauders and take from others. Others decide to be heroes. There's no morality or alignment or, but it's all consequences. It's all causality and cause and effect. If you do bad things and get too much of attention, you're going to get too much attention. If you keep your head low and if you help people, you might build relationships and friendships, but there's no right way to play that game in that respect. It assumes that you want to play a little more heroically, but it's not. There's nothing defining that. There's no morality or guidance in that system, unlike Adventures in Middle-earth or the One Ring role-playing game or Doctor Who or any of that.
Right.
And has a pretty detailed combat system, and yet the rule books are 2 little rule books that are like 20, 30 pages for the player's manual and like 30 pages for the DM's guide. They're tiny, and it's everything you need to, and then you've got equipment. Everything else is just equipmentless. So we're going to do an introduction. We're going to everybody make characters because we're going to go over the worksheets that are all math. Oh no, not medieval math! To make characters, and you do some basic calculations. There's addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Little tiny bit of algebra. It's not that bad. It's really not that bad. So everybody's going to make their characters with these worksheets. And then if we have time, we'll start that first beginning adventure. And I'm not going to be GMing. Drake is going to be GMing. Because that's one of his favorite games. He wants to play a lot more.
Do you have to calculate trajectories and things like that?
Well, in the combat rules, there's optional rules to add complexity, but it just says what your limits are. Right. It doesn't get too detailed in the combat system while still being pretty detailed. You'll get to experience that because there will definitely be some combat. The initial scene is just a breakout and escape, so it's pure action. The role play comes after you break out with whatever supplies you have left. Now you've got to limp along, avoiding enemy forces, you don't even know where to go, right? You don't even know where to. You're in the middle of Poland, surrounded by enemy forces everywhere. Some of you may or may not speak the language, and you need to stay alive. And some of it you can do some hunting and stuff, but you've got to find a way to survive. So some people are going to make friends. You're going to see marauders out there. Maybe you can go save a village from marauders, whatever. There's a lot of different ways to play this game. Others are just trying to get home. Well, which way? You're going to go up over the Alps. You're going to try to get cut through Berlin, which was nuked, but try to head to the Baltic Sea. Where are you going to go? You're surrounded on all fronts. So it's a challenge. And the interesting thing about the game is back in the 80s when we were playing it a lot, it's a great experience of geography. Like, I know Europe so much better. My son, who's in Europe right now, he's just went to the Netherlands and now he's in Amsterdam. Right now, this is Brennan. Mm-hmm. But he has a lot of knowledge of Europe because of his wargaming and what we did with Twilight 2000 and such as that.
Makes sense.
And so learned a lot, and you learn about cultures and languages, and I bring all of that into my games. I try to use different accents for the different languages, etc. It's a great experience of that. And they have modules all over the world. They have it in the U.S. and Mexico and China and the Middle East, and a lot of them. I've got a fair variety of them. And they have a little crossover with, they had 1 or 2 crossover modules of Paranoia.
And Cthulhu?
I think there's a Cthulhu crossover as well. I think so. There's also Paranoia Cthulhu crossover too, I think. So, but Drake's just going to be running the intro, and we'll run that today, between that 6 to 9 period, and then next on Monday as well, and then we'll see where we're at as far as going to the next game and such. But it's just a game that apparently nobody's familiar with in the group here, and there's some interesting isms about the game that are different than other role-playing games that people should be aware of.
Right.
So that's why we're doing it, and we're sharing it with everybody else. So we got to wrap it up. Got to take a break, and then we'll be back from 6 to 9 for the applied gaming session, which again we'll have a one sheet and then Twilight 2000. And again, we welcome your feedback wherever it may be. Be well and happy gaming.
And dream well.